at the kind of ideological, uh, should I say, halcyon kind of narrative of these left philosophies to try to change the economy. But there's a concept that we have called proof of concept, where
Yeah,
we like to look at like actual models
yeah.
that worked and how they can be implemented. What kind of proof of concept do we have that we could take something like this and put it to scale where it can work in a place like the United States?
Yeah, fantastic. Great question. And I apologize if I took a long time to answer that first question because I sort of
No,
needed to
take your
get a little
time.
bit into the model. Great. So, first off, it begins in Cleveland. In Cleveland, what they began with was getting anchor. They had a vicious tale of two cities. History there first of racist redlining, and then deindustrialization, including major population loss. Result of that was they had one neighborhood that was quite affluent, a few major anchor institutions, hospital, clinic, some nice houses, things like that around there. And then another neighborhood right next to it with 40,000 people with a median household income of $18,000. Extraordinary poverty, huge unemployment, and people in pretty dire straits. So they were trying to figure out how they could get some of the money to flow into that other part of the community. First thing they did was with an intervention from the Cleveland Foundation, often gets started by different people, in this case, a community nonprofit. They brought some anchor institutions together to sign on to a mantra of buy local, hire local, live local, get more money circulating locally. And then starting in 2008, they began to build up, they created a community nonprofit with help from a group called the Democracy Collaborative that would start three worker cooperatives. So community owned, neighborhood owned nonprofit that started three worker cooperatives, eco-friendly worker cooperatives, employing people from this underprivileged neighborhood, and then would continue to own 5 to 20% of the shares of each of those worker co-ops. So that if they were successful, some of the money would come back, they could reinvest in the network, but do so with community input. So there were independent businesses, but never totally losing track of community control and community influence. The evergreen cooperatives built up from the first few were rolled out between 2008 and 2011-12, I believe. And then they built up to about 90 employees by 2015. And then they started to really get hold of some of that procurement coming from the anchor institutions. From 2015 to 2021, they built up to about 400 employees or 350 employees, making 25% above industry averages. And then they started to add another layer to this, which was they created a fund for employee ownership. And this is a contemporary issue. What they noticed was that they started building based on Mondragon. Something's very different from when Mondragon built. Today we have what's called sardonically the silver tsunami of retiring entrepreneurs. So the silver tsunami of entrepreneurs is that we have in Canada $2 trillion worth of companies that are changing hands in the next decade because of retirement, and almost none of them have any succession plans. And they went, we should be trying to convert these businesses, community staples, successful companies with workers who are going to lose their jobs. We should be turning these into worker cooperatives. So they created a fund for employee ownership and have since then helped convert another 5 businesses, existing businesses in Cleveland, into worker co-ops by helping their workers purchase those companies, take them under worker control. Now, while this was happening, another city called Preston in England saw what was happening. They were in desperate condition, worst in the country. Saw what was happening in Cleveland, went, we want to do a version of that here, but we want to do it citywide and we want to do it way larger looking at procurement. They went from doing 30% of their procurement in the local region to 80%. So completely transformed it, including taking public pension funds and investing it locally while developing cooperatives, housing cooperatives, worker cooperatives, consumer cooperatives, and the first community land trust in the area. So they started doing this in 2011-12. In 2018, they were named the most improved city in the United Kingdom. And since then, they've been named the best place to raise a family in the United Kingdom, among other accolades, best place in the northwest of England to live. They've won this series of awards, which has led to another explosion of this practice. Importantly, one of the things that was found in Preston was that when they were saying they were going to go all in with this progressive use of procurement, the critics said, you're going to bankrupt the city. You're going to get terrible products at a very high price. It breaks all the principles of neoliberal development, right? And they found that, in fact, there was so much more viable activity happening in the area that when it came time to collect taxes, they had the ability to make public investments in public housing, in public arts and culture institutions, quality of life elements, publicly owned cinema, that they had not been able to make in generations. So they found it was exactly the reverse. This was a much better way of creating a virtuous cycle of democratic wealth building in the community. Since then, community wealth building has spread to, there have been initiatives in cities, small towns, mid-sized cities, indigenous communities all around the world, including Chicago, Amsterdam, Sydney. I can go into some of those. One of the big developments that's happened recently, and it's kind of important to clock just how much growth of community wealth building there has been in 19 years as we look for what might be some of the leading ways that we could move beyond neoliberalism, because it's starting to get to that kind of scale where we can talk about that. Um,
Mhm.
in Scotland, the government looked at community wealth building, funded some pilot projects, and then adopted community wealth building as core methodology towards their well-being and just transition agendas, appointed a minister of community wealth, and created centralized resources to get community wealth building at least rolling in every county across the entire country. So we are starting to see a feedback loop, which comes with a different relationship to government, in which things that have powerful demonstrations at the local level create resources at larger levels of government, but not with the larger levels of government taking over the local, with the larger levels of government creating the kinds of facilitatory resources that allow this methodology to be implemented and spread in many, many places. So a ripple effect across a country. And that's where the potential for another really big wave of growth, based on these really powerful demonstrations. It's been growing because of those powerful demonstrations. The proof of concept is very strong. But we are now seeing that level where there is room for an explosion of growth of this activity from where it is now.